Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. In today's installment, we shall be covering episode 48, Tourist Trap, or as it's known in the Japanese original, Poo 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 Land Sightseeing Tour. This episode was originally released in Japan on September 14th, 2002 as the 48th episode, while the English dub, done by the notorious 4Kids, was released on April 26th, 2003 as the 43rd episode. This change in release date was likely due to the change in the release date of other episodes, as opposed to anything wrong with the episode itself. But now that we have covered this pre-release kind of trivia, let us start with the episode proper. The episode opens to a shot of a soccer ball as we see Tuff, the Cappy Kids, and Kirby playing with it. The camera pans over to Tiff, who is reading a book. Some in the fan base have pointed out that this intro is very similar to that scene in the episode Scare Tactics Part 2, which is an episode that I've already reviewed, so please go check out that video if you're interested in it. However, unlike that episode, Kirby does not end up getting kicked, and instead, after being told to do so, he heads over to some tall grass to get the ball that was kicked away. Hopefully there's no ticks in there, because, they tend to be in tall grass. He goes to get the ball, but suddenly a flash bangs him right in the face, as we see a group of pale-skinned, Hawaiian shirt-wearing aliens taking photos of the baby before running off. Tiff and Tuff run over to see if he's okay, and more of these pale-faced entities emerge to take photos. Seeing as how they are relevant and are this episode's closest equivalent to a character of the week, let's talk about them for a bit right now. These unnamed tourists are quite the stereotype indeed. The tacky shirts, the grotesque sunglasses, the oversized hats, and the cheap large cameras are just the typical tourist appearance. They speak a foreign language that is literal gibberish. Speaking of that, that is the first change between versions. The Japanese original has a far lower pitch, while the English dub is far more rapid. It's not that big of a difference, really. Interestingly, they have a similarity to the poison mash enemy seen in the Revenge of the King subgame in the DS remake of Kirby Superstar called Superstar Ultra, though given that that game was released after the release of the episode, it's probably just a coincidence, or maybe they did play a role in inspiring that enemy type. Resuming with the plot, the tourists run away. Tiff and Tuff approach, with the girl trying to get them to explain what they are doing here, but pauses when she notices that the tourists have dropped a flyer. In the Japanese original, this flyer had text that read, "Poo Poo Poo Land Sightseeing Tour. Exciting." The English dub by 4Kids removed this text, likely due to the inconsistently named location. As you see, the name Poo 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 Village was changed to Dreamland in the English dub. While I completely and utterly revile censorship and find that this was a mistake, I do admit that it does make a little more sense due to the fact that the name is inconsistent. I think the way 4Kids handled it was really not well done. Tiff goes over to pick up the flyer and reads it to her brother and Kirby. They wander over, and she says that those people were tourists, as we then cut to the jazzy intro. After the intro, we cut to Campytown, where we see the mysterious tourists exploring slash sightseeing the town. In the Japanese original, there is a short scene of Gengu, the store owner, trying to sell a bunch of tacky mementos to the interested tourists, including masks of Dedede, Escargoon, and strangely Tiff and Tuff. It's weird, but definitely profitable. The English dub cut this for reasons that have been unfortunately unknown, but it likely had to do with the time restraints placed upon the English world. Tiff and the others are shocked as they arrive at the hectic scene, as some of the tourist children run into the street in front of the mayor, who just barely manages to stop running into them and is utterly bamboozled at this, and asks Gengu what exactly is going on, and who these people are, and Gengu explains that they are tourists, which shocks the mayor and his wife. And his wife then asks the reasonable question of why they are here, before Tuff points to a parked large vehicle, which is a DDD-themed tour guide bus. The door opens, and the king explains that he's turned Dreamland into a tourist destination. Tiff asks why, to which the king says, if it goes well, he'll become rich. Escargoon jumps out and says that he read in a magazine that the tourist industry is a surefire way into newfound wealth. The mayor is annoyed at the fact that they were not asked, but the king says that the buck stops with him and that it's his authority. Tiff starts to complain, but Escargoon cuts her off with a whistle that attracts the tourists' attention as they begin the tour of Campytown. Waddle Doo is there, and due to his multilingual capacity, serves as a translator for everyone and the tourists. He talks to the tourists who say that they want to eat first before sightseeing, and after a bit of confusion, they decide to take them all to Kawasaki. The chef is utterly shocked by the sheer number of customers that he doesn't normally get, and before he can really understand anything, he complains at the very weird requests for exotic food like quail eggs, catfish tails, and chow mein chili with fried clams. Whatever the heck that is. The king dismisses his concerns, saying all his food tastes the same due to his bad cooking, and Kawasaki seems to accept this criticism and begins cooking his terrible food, as Waddle Dees help carry food to the tourists. This has the expected reaction, and the tourists flee the restaurant, getting sick and just gagging at the horrible food. The king is surprisingly not caring at all, and then we see a scene of Kirby eating food. This particular scene is noteworthy as it is literally reusing of old animation, this time of episode 34, A Recipe for Disaster, and it didn't even completely obscure shiitake. Man, I did a whole review of that episode if you're interested, but holy moly, this is perhaps the most blatant reuse of footage in the entire series. We then cut to outside as we see where Escargoon begins the tour, showing them the many places of town. The tourists then run into the bus, while Kirby follows after them. Kawasaki runs after them as they didn't pay, but Escargoon says that he doesn't even deserve a tip, and the chef falls to his knees, aghast at the exploitation. We then cut to Professor Curio's museum. Professor Curio is a bit concerned about this and freaks out when one of the tourists picks up an artifact. Curio runs over to save it, but is too late as the tourist drops it and causes it to shatter into millions of pieces. We then see another tourist pick a piece out of another artifact, which causes it to collapse into 1,000 pieces. He then sees the kids, including a strangely misbehaving Kirby, breaking more of the artifacts before he falls to his knees in depression. It is here that we see the next two changes between versions. In the Japanese original, he makes a statement in relation to being a middle-aged bachelor, while in the English dub, it sees him saying that he thinks ancient civilizations were destroyed by tourists. Both versions work perfectly fine, though I must admit I don't really get the joke in the Japanese original. In the Japanese original, in the background, we hear a minor key variation of the Invincible Candy theme from Kirby's Superstar. And honestly, it's really cool, and it's quite a shame that 4Kids saw it necessary to remove this amazing music. We then cut to Mabel's fortune-telling booth as she reads the fortune of two tourists, saying that chaos is in their future, while the children and Kirby run around. Some of the kids approach the table in what is a scene that is slightly longer than the Japanese original, and that was cut down likely to better fit within US time slots. Mabel gets greatly annoyed at this, and Escargoon tells her to slap a smile on, but she says that if they don't leave, then he will get slapped. Oh yeah. We then see in the Japanese original a scene of the tourists entering into the police station and taking turns taking photos with the often repeat criminal Doron, much to the confusion and consternation of Chief Bookums. This scene was removed in the English dub either to better fit within US time slots, but some have said that it might be because they didn't want to encourage speaking with criminals. I'm not sure about that though. Personally, I thought it was actually a real big shame, given that the anime never really did much with that character, and so seeing him again would have been neat, but it's a shame that it never happened, really. We then see Escargoon and the king invite the tourists to get back on the bus after going to the bathroom. The king and Escargoon get in after they all get on and after obtaining the last straggler. Drive off. Tiff watches this and comments on all the filthy litter behind that they left. And yeah, it's quite disgusting. The mayor walks into view as we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, Mayor Len Blustergas comments that the tourism will improve the town's economy, with Tiff pointing out that the ruined if this continues. In the English dub, he instead suggests that Kirby inhales the garbage left behind, which understandably offends Tiff, who points out that he's a Star Wars. The English dub, honestly, for me, works better, but both versions are fine. In both versions, after this interaction, Tiff looks around and wonders where Kirby went, as he's not there. We then cut to the bus, driving to the next location, that being on the coastline. The tourists seem rather bored as the camera pans over, as we see Kirby and Tuff on the back seat. Realizing that the tourists are getting bored, Dedede orders Escargoon to do something to keep their attention. Escargoon then begins to sing. In the Japanese original, this scene is uncensored, but apparently in some versions / airings of the English dub, this was apparently removed, but the version that I found on the internet and I used for this video when it came to editing had this scene in it, which is kind of weird to be honest. I've never really seen that before, but I guess it's just one of those things that occurs randomly, I guess. He is absolutely horrible, and the tourists understandably yell at him and throw cans at the poor snail. The king says that they gotta keep them interested and entertained so that they can get a 3-star rating in the Nightmare Enterprise travel guide. The snail asks if it's worth it, but the king says it'll make him rich. They then arrive at the lighthouse as we see the group looking over the sea. Kine appears somewhat interested in all the commotion that's occurring near the ocean. The king, seeking to entertain the mob, firmly grasps Kirby and, despite Tuff's annoyance, flings him into the sea in an attempt to try and entertain the masses. Kine goes over to Kirby and asks him how Tiff is doing and if she asks about him. Kirby answers the best that he can, and Kine is heartbroken. This lack of action causes the tourists to boo them. Realizing that this was a bust, Escargoon, the king, and the Waddle Doo get the tourists back onto the bus, which drives forwards after stopping to save a straggler and leaving Kirby in the dust, who just runs after them. Kine waves goodbye to them and reminds Kirby to say hello to Tiff for him. They then drive to Dinah Blade's nest, as we see the baby chick wander out into the cave entrance, which is surrounded by tourists. Escargoon provides commentary on the nature of the Thunderbird, and the chick seems happy at first, but the constant camera flashes cause it to freak out. Dynablade arrives, and noticing that its baby is horrified, flies in such a way that attacks the tourists, justified in their fear. The king and others flee back onto the bus. The mama bird attacks the bus, eventually forcing it off the road, much to the chagrin of everyone inside except Kirby, who is enjoying it all. Eventually, the bus lands on a tree, which launches it back onto the road. Escargoon tries to get the king to stop, but the brakes are out, and they are sent flying off a street ramp and are seen falling through the air and land on the ground with a thud. Though the king, Escargoon, and Tuff seem greatly annoyed, the tourists seem to be having greatly enjoyed this entire thing, with Waddle-Doo saying that they thought the ride was fun and that they wanted to do it again. We then cut to the castle where we see the tourists have been invited to stay at, and they are being tended to by a legion of Waddle Dee servants. Escargoon explains to them tomorrow's tour schedule, saying that they'll be visiting Kaboo Valley, Wispy Woods, and Booma Dooma Volcano. One of the tourists speaks to Waddle-Doo, who translate the questions of whether it will be as boring as today's was. Apparently, everything except the incident of the bus being attacked by Dynablade was very boring, and the tourists began loudly complaining about the trip and how they want adventure. Meanwhile, Tiff points out how Dreamland is too humdrum to be a vacation destination, to which her brother agrees. The king, seeming to get back at them, says that tourists are free to sleep anywhere in the castle as they wish. We then see that Tiff and her family have been forced to sleep in the castle's courtyard in a tent. Both her and her brother are rather upset, though their parents are not as easily offended and seem to be rather happy. This is the final change between versions. In the Japanese original, they talk about how it's okay sometimes because if tourists come, then that they shall become famous. The English dub changes this to them saying that the air here is nicer with less insects, much to their daughter's dismay. Both seem perfectly dismissive, and honestly, neither version is particularly better, though I admit the English dub seems to flow a little better. Though in both versions, this conversation is cut short by those annoying tourists taking more of their annoying pictures. We then cut to the king calling up the enemy sales guy, who asks the king how things are going when it comes to tourism. King asks for something to liven up the trip and make the tourists happy and likely to give a positive review, and so the snarky salesman sends over the monster of the week. So this little underwhelming orb is referred to as Flame Feeder, or in Japan, Fire Jelly, though its base form looks like very harmless or one of those weird novelty glass paperweights. Its second form, which we shall see shortly, is far more intimidating. Also, as you can probably expect, it has no voice actor, which is fine given that it is inactive for most of the episode and really didn't need to speak. The enemy sales guy explains the gimmick of this monster to Dedede as how it grows in power the hotter it gets. The king and Escargoon say that this thing will really entertain the tourists, while the sales guy adds that in addition, it will also likely get rid of Kirby, and the trio laugh evilly. Dedede retires to his room, but is hit in the face with a pillow by tourist children and Kirby. He complains that this is his room, but ends up getting hit by a lot of other furniture, with him and Escargoon getting crushed by a huge radio. Ouch. We then cut to the next day as we see the king and Escargoon are tired from what happened to them last night, and they give the job of tour guide to Tiff. The girl is understandably shocked at this, but the king wanders off to get some sleep before she can reject it. Her brother wishes that they would have a nightmare, which is kind of funny, but Tiff realizes that if she does a boring job, then the tourist will never come back again, and the two siblings agree to this noble plot. We then cut to Tiff, fully dressed in the garb of a tour guide, and shows the tourists onto the bus. We then see them drive off to the ancient Kaboo. The tourists climb onto this ancient monument, and Tiff tries to teach them some history, but the terrible tourists then throw coins at the statue and begin carving/doodling graffiti onto the monument. Tiff tries to get them to stop, but as translated by Waddle-Doo, the tourists say that they do this everywhere they go, as if that's some sort of an excuse. Tiff says that this is quite rude, which it is, but Escargoon tells her to chill out, and he and the king go back to the bus. Tiff says sorry to Kaboo and that she'll come back and clean him off. As they leave, he sardonically says he could use some moisturizer. We then cut to them driving on the bus. Tiff and Tuff discuss the schedule. They say that it would be irresponsible to take the destructive tourists to such a pristine environment as Wispy Woods. So they decide to change the schedule and announce to the tourists that they're going to be going to the Booma Dooma volcano. The king and Escargoon, who had been sleeping up to this point, groggily awaken and snicker at how they are about to start their evil scheme. The bus parks on the path near the volcano, as Tiff begins to do some tour talking, while Tuff fills the canisters of the tourists with ice to hand to them due to the heat. We cut to the edge of the volcano, as she warns them not to get too close. But we see the tourists complaining, and she asks Waddle-Doo what is going on. He explains that the tourists are finding the volcano boring. Tuff is just exasperated by this and suggests that they start pushing the tourists into the lava. However, suddenly, fireworks are set off. Tiff is confused, but the others cheer, and it is revealed by a camera pan that this is being done by King Dedede. Escargoon points out how there will be real fireworks going on real soon, as we see the king then toss Flame Feeder into the volcano. After a bit, the two look at it as the orb activates and powers up in the lava. Tiff suspects something is going on, but then the mighty Flame Feeder emerges out in its second ghostly jellyfish-like form. It then begins attacking, sending the tourists fleeing for their lives. An elderly pair of tourists trip on a rock and are almost scorched, but Kirby, under the guidance of Tiff, saves them unjustifiably by sucking the fire up in order to become... Fire Kirby. So far, he's been in a total of 6 previous episodes, so I really won't waste your time repeating what I've said before. So if you're interested, go watch some of those videos if you want to hear a more in-depth coverage of Fire Kirby, but to keep it brief, it made a good transition into the anime. Tuff is happy at this revelation, and Tiff calls on Kaboo to send over the Warp Star. Then we see a major animation/continuity error. Now, you remember Kaboo, he had all that graffiti on him, but in this footage, he lacks all the graffiti that was placed upon him. Now, some have tried to hand-wave or at least explain this away by saying that it is possible that Meta Knight took the time to clean him off-screen, but there are a few problems with that. Firstly, Meta Knight himself doesn't appear in the episode, and it would be kind of weird to insert him appearing off-screen. And second, that doesn't really solve the issue, as if that's not expressly told in the episode, you can't assume it actually happened. But honestly, the real reason is because it's just some reused animation, which is fine and honestly not that big of a deal. Anyway, Kirby jumps on the warp star and approaches the giant flaming jellyfish ghost. Kirby spews fire at the flame feeder, but despite the kids cheering him on, the flame feeder, due to his, intrinsic ability, begins to absorb the fire and grow in both power and size, and begins attacking Kirby. Kirby attacks some more, but they are shown to be useless as the king laughs at Kirby's feeble attempts as we see that his own fire is slowly weakening, and Tuff points out that eventually Kirby will be out of fire. We then see a weakened Kirby being knocked off the warp star by one of the tentacles and is sent falling to the ground. Tuff wonders what they can do, but Tiff suddenly has an idea. She pulls out her ice and tosses it at Kirby, but due to being so small and around so much heat, it causes it to melt before Kirby can inhale it. She calls to the tourists, and in a rare case of kindness, they actually help her out and throw their ice at Kirby, who manages to inhale some of it in order to become Ice Kirby first appeared back in Kirby's Adventure, and the anime uses the cool redesign first seen in Kirby Superstar with the visor and the icy helmet. I talked about this chilling ability in 2 previous episodes, so please check those out if you are interested in a more detailed coverage. But to keep it brief, the anime did a well enough job transitioning it into the anime. Arguably better than Fire due to it being less overused, and frankly, it's just a lot more of my favorite ability. Also, this is the 4th episode to have 2 abilities in one. Sorry that I forgot to mention that in previous instances, but I'm only human, so sometimes I leave stuff out of these reviews, even though I try my best to be as thorough as possible. And it's neat seeing 2 abilities in one episode. That's not very common, so yeah. Tuff cheers him on, while the king and Escargoon are mortified at their plan being foiled, as the flame feeder is slowly shrunk into a harmless cyan form that Kirby proceeds to inhale and spit out into a solid block of harmless ice. King Dedede and Escargoon grunt in frustration and yell at Kirby, but the pink puffball proceeds to kick the glacier and send it falling onto the petty tyrant and his sniveling minion, causing them to be crushed under a pile of ice as the tourists cheer at his victory. We then cut to the next day as we see Escargoon and the King reading some of the negative reviews that honestly just sound like Redditors, to be honest. But for some reason that is not really explained, they do praise Kirby, so they're not completely heartless at least, even though their behavior was abysmal. The King, who is in bandages, says that they're ready for the next round of tourists, but the enemy sales guy says that as far as the tourism industry is concerned, Dreamland is dead, and gives them a failing grade with an X. The king, like a petulant child not getting what he wants, says that they can all take a hike and that he doesn't want them. The episode ends with Tiff, Tuff, and Kirby leaping into the air, happy that the tourists are now gone forever. Now let's cover the episode's positives, negatives, and my final thoughts. So, in terms of positives, I thought the episode explored a really underutilized theme, that being the negative side of tourism, which isn't really done that often, and frankly, I think it depicts the issue very well, as tourism, despite making a lot of money for the rich people, actually can cause a lot of damage, especially when not in a controlled manner. I mean, there are just tons of instances of tourists just desecrating large structures and just doing a lot of gross stuff by like throwing trash on the ground. And it's really a shame that this isn't addressed more often. Though, to be honest, if I was given the opportunity, I would totally take a vacation to Dreamland, even if it is particularly quiet. Yeah, I just think it'd be nice to be there. Of course, I would make sure to mind my own manners and not be abusive like these other tourists were. Also, I gotta wonder how Enemy delivers these people. Other positives would, ironically enough, be the tourists. Yes, they're annoying to everyone in the episode, but it's done in the way that's intentional and isn't meant to be charming in the same way that, like, Jar Jar Binks is. Frankly, I think that even though they don't really have much quote unquote character, and frankly, out of all the guest characters in the anime, they're the ones I would want to see the least, I think they serve their purpose as well and they help to convey the theme of the episode. Also, the fact that the episode has two abilities is rather interesting and not something you see in the anime a lot, and that's really neat. It was nice to see that Kirby and his friends had to figure out more than just one inhale one time to beat the bad guy. I also thought all the characters were used really well. King Dedede is up to his usual tricks of making money, while Tiff is just having to clean up the mess he makes. Just really good dynamic, and frankly, really well done. Now, let's get into the negatives. And I want to start on something that I'm a bit 50-50 on, that being Flame Jelly. I mean, it's a bit weird. Personally, I actually really like this monster, and I thought that the design was simplistic, but rather interesting, and is definitely an improvement from the previous enemy's monster. But I know a lot of people criticize it for not really being an active part of the plot. But I must say that while a lot of people view that as a negative, I still really liked it, even if it is admittedly on the lower end of the monsters in terms of the anime exclusive monsters, but it's way better than the worst that are on the show, so there's that. But let's get into like the actual negatives, the stuff that I genuinely consider a flaw with the episode. And that being several things. Firstly, there is the censorship, and yes, some of it made a little bit of sense. You would want to change the text that reads Poo 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 Land to Dreamland. But I think that a lot of the censorship and removal of scenes just made the episode a little weaker. I mean, especially the fact that they removed this scene with Doron, who is an otherwise rather underexplored character. That was just a real shame. There's also the reused animation, but personally I didn't really see that as an issue. I mean, this is a 100 episode anime. You're going to have to cut corners at some point, and it's not really all that noticeable unless you pay super close attention. Also, there was that continuity error that I talked about, but frankly, that's not really that big of an issue for me. I mean, it is noteworthy and is noticeable, but still, it's not something that ruins the episode for me. So overall, what are my final thoughts on the episode? Well, frankly, I found the episode really fun and I enjoyed it. And I think it's definitely on the list of things that definitely deserve to be watched. It's not in the top 10, heck, probably not even in the top 15, but it is still worth a watch if you got the free time and you're binging the entire series. I'm the Dark Master, and join me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. Have a nice day and subscribe if you like this kind of content.